Welcome to my channel Shadows of History. His name was Jean Thurel. He was a French soldier who lived from 1698 to 1807. He's truly remarkable. He served in the French Line Infantry for 75 years, for months. On September 17, 1716, Thurel enlisted in the French army and served in the Line Infantry, and was apparently a good soldier. He first saw action in 1733 at the Siege of Kiel against Austria in the War of the Polish Succession. During the battle, he was shot in the chest with a musket and lived. Not bad. We don't know much about Thurel in the years following this battle until 1759, during the Battle of Minden in the 7 Years' War. In this battle, he was slashed in the head by a sword 6 times and lived. Impressive, considering Thurel was 61 years old at this time. The Battle of Minden, 1759. After this battle, he was never again injured in combat. Thurel had siblings in the army, too, but they weren't as lucky as he was. 3 of his brothers were killed in the Battle of Fontenoy in 1745. One of Thurel's sons was killed in the naval Battle of the Saints off the coast of Dominica in 1782. Remarkably, Jean Thurel was scolded only one time in his military career, in 1747, during the Siege of Bergen. Apparently, Thurel's regiment had occupied the city's citadel, but Thurel fell behind and found himself alone. So, he climbed the citadel walls somehow and entered the citadel the hard way, so he wouldn't miss muster. In 1787, when Thurel was 89, his regiment was marching along the French coast. Due to his age, his officers offered him a carriage to sit in for the march, but Thurel refused and marched the entire distance on foot, claiming that he had never marched by carriage before and had no intention of starting to do so. Also in 1787, Thurel personally met French King Louis XVI. Yes, the same one who was beheaded, who addressed him as father and granted him a nice pension when he retired in 1792. After Thurel's retirement in 1792, he eventually met Napoleon, who greatly admired him, in the early 1800s. You might be wondering how far up the ranks Thurel climbed during his 75-year army stint. Thurel was offered a promotion many times, but each time, he refused. He was a private in the French army for 75 years. That alone is a very remarkable story.
In ancient Rome, it was common to literally throw away unwanted babies before naming them, and the practice wasn't frowned upon. Did this occur all over the ancient world during that period in history? It was common enough in late Victorian London for young constables to be on the lookout for it. Shoreditch Police Station was my first posting. The first patrol of Metropolitan Police took place from there in 1829. We had a display of old pocketbooks from the archives. I found one that described a probationary constable's duties on the City Road and Hoxton beat in 1897. The same beat I was on in 2002. Wenlock Basin, Hoxton, London. First job on early turn, 0500 to 1700, was to check the length of Wenlock Basin and City Road Basin, 2 wharves running off the Regent's Canal for bodies. Early turn were especially told to look out for discarded babies, which because of their small size may be confused for regular flotsam. Unwanted newborns from King's Cross, Camden, Pentonville and Islington would be dumped in the canal and collect at the foot of the basins, or else float on down to Limehouse, where another probationer would be searching the locks. The bodies of adults and grown children would be checked for obvious and suspicious injury. If very obvious, a murder would be reported to CID. If you couldn't find any injuries, you tried to identify the deceased by clothing, name tags or letters and sent the body to Bow coroners, where most often a ruling of death by misadventure was recorded, especially if alcohol was found in their system. Babies under a certain length and weight, about 6 months of age, more if severely malnourished, which was common, were taken straight to Bow coroners. Those without obvious injuries were ruled unexplained infant mortality, without more than a cursory examination. Those with obvious injuries were recorded as infanticide, and the investigation ended there. They went into mass graves in the Lea Valley with the paupers and unclaimed. Infant mortality from disease and complications, a regular feature of home births back then. Many of these babies would not have survived, but churches wouldn't bury children from unwed parents, a common cause itself for the disposal of the child. Many wouldn't take in unbaptized children, and many wouldn't baptize a child under 6 months because of the likelihood and cost of burying so many. So the canal became the depository for the unnamed and unwanted who didn't make it through their first few months. Of course, with the total lack of investigation by police or coroner back then, or particular interest from the church, families and local authorities, the number of those babies smothered, shook, beat or starved to death will never be known.
How did Napoleon manage to crush Egyptian Mamluk armies so easily? Napoleon Bonaparte himself explained it 2 centuries ago with the old, as military history, rule: an army of soldiers led by warriors will always defeat an army of warriors. Napoleon gave credit to the individual combat qualities of the Mamelukes. The Mamelukes are beautiful, magnificent. Their horses rearing, plunging. Napoleon himself recognizes their courage. The Mamelukes charged the cannons with their sabers and their horses. They fought like lions. But he stressed their incompetence in organized mass operations. 2 Mamelukes were undoubtedly more than a match for 3 Frenchmen. 100 Mamelukes were equal to 100 Frenchmen. 300 Frenchmen could generally beat 300 Mamelukes, and 1,000 Frenchmen invariably defeated 1,500 Mamelukes. In the Battle of the Pyramids, Napoleon just organized his army into 5 gigantic squares. These are men kneeling and standing and firing, so you got a continual rolling fire. The Mamelukes rode around the squares and were shot at by that square and by this square. The French lost 30 men, the Mamelukes lost probably 5 or 6,000. Note, in fact, the entire military history of mankind can be described as a series of wars and battles in which armies of disciplined, manageable soldiers easily defeat even larger armies of warriors' knights, in which each warrior far surpasses any of the soldiers in combat skills and courage. Greeks against Persian, the victorious marches of the Roman legions, the English at Crécy and Agincourt against the French knights. The difference always comes from the basic quality of the soldiers, their controllability, opposed to the warriors, usually acting according to their own decisions.
What was the fate of the 100,000 French prisoners left behind during Napoleon's retreat from Moscow? The fury of the peasants. The French prisoners were really in difficulty when the army of Napoleon was scattered in Russia. It was a bad cold, and worse was the anger of the ordinary Russians. The government was unprepared to maintain prison camps, and thus thousands of starving French soldiers fell into the hands of angry villagers. The French were not soldiers to these peasants, they were invaders who had burned their houses and fields. Payback felt like a holy duty. People even bribed Russian soldiers to deliver prisoners to them so that they had the chance to avenge. The death marches. Authorities attempted to assist by providing the prisoners with some money and clothes. But the prisoners were too many and the supplies too few, and thus were paraded in columns through the snow. These marches were hell. Disease and hunger and the freezing weather killed thousands on the march. A strange new life. It is only about 30,000 that returned to France. The others remained in Russia and began afresh. Some rebuilt ruined cities. Some of them were turned into tutors, as the Russian nobility was fond of French culture. Some of them even enlisted into the Russian army. The survivor lived until 1894 and was a teacher in Russia almost all his life. What, in its start, was disaster turned into an odd combination of enemies becoming neighbors.